Hi everybody, welcome back to Earned Happy Endings. I apologize for the extremely long wait between my last video and this one, but I'm here, and let's finish up the Manic Pixar Dream Girl series, so we can move on and talk about other things. But before I do, I sat down to record this and got kind of sentimental, partly because this will probably be the last time I visit my thesis in a while. And it also had been a long time since I actually read my conclusion. And I realized that I didn't really want to try to hide the words I wrote by talking about it, and I didn't want to try to make it funny because I think it works best if I read it like a story, because it kind of is a little more story-like than the rest of what I wrote. So for future reference, this is my thesis. Nicely bound. And so today, instead of what we normally do, I'm going to sit down and read to you as we say goodbye to the Pixar shorts and think about moving forward and what they've taught us. So here we go. Conclusion. A 4-minute love story better than Twilight. If you don't understand that reference, this refers to a popular meme on the internet. Making fun of the Twilight book series by talking about how Pixar crafted the montage, which is 4 minutes long and more emotionally effective than Twilight. According to the meme. I'm not picking a fight with Twilight here, except that I did. Anyways, they kind of got the timing wrong in the actual meme. I corrected them. It's a 4-minute love story. But enough about that. Let's begin. In 1986, life embodied in Pixar terms was a joyful, energetic lamp who loved his father and wanted to explore. In 2013, life to Pixar was a familiar city animated by the rain and committed to helping a joyful, energetic blue umbrella get the girl. 23 years and different creative teams separate these two films, yet their spirit and their values are the same. Founder of Studio Ghibli, Hayao Miyazaki, said that, quote, Pixar's style may change or its stories may change, but as long as it keeps its soul and heart, the studio will be able to survive, end quote. Luxo Jr. and The Blue Umbrella are two films that define Pixar's heart, and the fact that they are their oldest and their newest point to Pixar's survival. It has survived because its leaders have fostered a culture that mentors new talent and passes along institutional knowledge so that each film continues to add to the ever-increasing learning portfolio. The shorts are time capsules and lessons. What works gets documented, and what does not work gets fixed. They exhibit a mastery of both sentiment and comedy, which get fused in their features. There is an ongoing commitment to experimenting and testing the boundaries of the medium. Most importantly, they are condensed examples of Pixar's commitment to excellence and optimistic worldview. Perhaps the best evidence of the value of the short films to Pixar is when the short film strategies are utilized in the features that the studio is known for. Pixar has countless examples of these types of sequences in their features that emulate what has been learned in the shorts. For example, in Toy Story 2, there is a montage set to music called, quote, When She Loved Me, end quote, or more commonly, Jessie's song. The montage is 3 minutes long and tells the story of Jessie the cowgirl doll and her relationship with her owner, Emily. Emily grows up as the sequence progresses. It starts with the joy of the two of them playing together, but ends with Emily abandoning Jessie when she outgrows her. It is a sequence free from dialogue. The lyrics of the song tell the story, but not in the oppressive way the narration in Bounding does. They fade to the background, and the mournful score and the images take precedent. Meanwhile, the world's lighting and mise-en-scène shift with mood and time as the spaces remain the same, but Emily changes. These cinematic strategies, present in all the short films, contribute to what is one of the most emotionally effective sequences Pixar has ever drafted. As actor Tom Hanks famously said about the first screening he saw of Toy Story 2, quote, When Jessie's song came up, Tim Allen and him were just 40-year-old men crying our eyes out over this abandoned cowgirl doll. It was a knee breaker, end quote. Jesse's song started a trend of dialogue-free, heartwarming sequences in the features that behave like short films, yet work to serve the purpose of the feature. The most moving of these sequences, and one of the most useful for this study, is the married life montage that opens the 2009 film Up. And for future reference, this is my favorite film sequence, rivaled only by the Jimmy Stewart drunk scene in the Philadelphia Story. Anyways, Up is one of Pixar's most beloved features and one of the two, the other being Toy Story 3, that have been nominated for a Best Picture Oscar. Its story, however, is unusual for an American animated feature. The film's main protagonist is a grumpy old man named Carl, who journeys to South America in a house that floats by way of thousands of rainbow balloons. The purpose driving such a journey is that Carl wants to honor the dream of his late wife, Ellie. The film therefore begins with a montage that depicts their entire relationship. While this montage is roughly 4 minutes long, Up is famous for this montage. David Denby, film critic for The New Yorker, writes that, quote, "The marital sequence is one of the most moving animated episodes ever made," end quote. And Manola Dargis, film critic for The New York Times, writes that the sequence is, quote, "an adult relationship that the director Pete Docter brilliantly compresses into some 4 wordless minutes and is filmmaking at its purest," end quote. These critics voice the public's appreciation for the film, but also specifically for the film's format. The silence and brevity are elements that are celebrated as opposed to being seen as limitations. They add to the film's emotional resonance rather than detract. In many ways, Married Life is Pixar's most beloved short film. It shares many elements with the short films and is celebrated for them. There are, however, key differences in terms of framing within the narrative. So what Married Life ultimately shows is how the short form can be best adapted to fit the feature. The biggest difference between Married Life and the shorts is the sequence's context. The film introduces the two protagonists, Ellie and Carl, as children in a brief sequence of scenes preceding Married Life, in which their personalities get sharply defined by dialogue and the way the children play. None of the shorts had the luxury of being able to introduce their characters ahead of time. Meanwhile, the sequence is meant to be an introduction to the film as a whole. It ends sadly, but the rest of the film challenges that sadness. Standing alone, it is not as complete as films like Partly Cloudy and La Luna, because it has an unsatisfactory conclusion, much like Red's Dream. Taken in context, however, and the film is completed later on when Carl learns how to move past his wife's death by celebrating her life. The entire film ends up solving the conflict raised in the montage. It is truly an expansion of the short film. While the context is important, however, the actual content of the short is evocative of the short films that preceded it and foreshadows some of the elements of the shorts that followed it. The opening of the sequence is the wedding of Carl and Ellie, which quickly reinforces the characterizations established by the introduction to the film. Carl is quiet but happy, and Ellie is literally bouncing with excitement. She is the one who kisses him and not the other way around. Much like Junior's wiggle, this physicalizes her personality. They also share a youthful enthusiasm. Their families reflect the bride and groom, much like the atmospheres of the shorts reflect the moods of their characters, and the mise-en-scène of Jesse's song reflects the different stages of growing up for Emily. Ellie's side fills the pews in colorful dress and yells exuberantly. Carl's side is sparsely populated and dressed in blacks and grays. These quick shots are examples of purely visual storytelling. There is no dialogue to explain Carl and Ellie's characters, yet their families tell the story. It communicates the same information about the two protagonists we learned when they were children, just in a quicker, more efficient way. The next few shots serve to introduce Ellie and Carl's house. Carl carries Ellie in her bridal gown to a dilapidated old place, and the next shot is Ellie, still dressed in her gown, sawing a board in half. Once again, this is characterization through action. Ellie is the type of woman who is excited to work on a project when she is still dressed up for her wedding. It is a small detail, just like Tin Toy's plume, that gives her personality. Meanwhile, this section establishes Carl and Ellie as a team. They work together to get this house up and running. Also, fun fact, it is the house they played in as children. It's the little things. Little things become symbols for their relationship. They push each other's chairs into place. Carl accidentally leaves a handprint on the mailbox. Ellie responds by purposely leaving her own. The house itself becomes a manifestation of Ellie's dreams from when she was a little girl, as seen by a pan up from her childish drawing to this newly painted house. This house as Ellie to us. It is deeply connected to her because she helped build it. So, for the montage, however, it is Carl and Ellie building a life together, and the audience gets to see it happen. Two huge differences this montage has with many of the shorts discussed previously is that this montage stars humans, and more importantly, there's nothing fantastical about this montage. While it is not photorealistic like the Blue Umbrella, it is the most realistic in emotional content. The filmmakers, therefore, must balance its cartoon look with the occasional somberness of what is happening on screen. The characters' personalities must come exclusively through their expressions and their actions, and these cannot be too exaggerated like in Presto. The artists, therefore, develop Carl and Ellie's personalities in the building sequence and the picnic and zoo sequences that follow. She is high-spirited but loving, and he is hapless but endlessly devoted. She smirks at him, he gazes at her. They balance each other out. The picnic scene that follows the house building also plays with dialogue in a new way. Just like every short except for Bounden and Day and Night, Married Life has no dialogue. In the picnic scene, Carl and Ellie's mouths move and they are definitely talking to each other. The remarkable thing is that we do not need to know what they are saying. First of all, we see the clouds they are watching through Carl and Ellie's eyes, and they fade into the figures they are discussing so we know what they are thinking of. That strategy will become important later when this scene is repeated when the couple is thinking of children. For now, though, it makes little difference that the clouds shift because the point of the scene is to see the couple interacting and enjoying each other's company. Carl simply closes his eyes and smiles as his wife talks. There is more power in their expressions than their words, and this has been the guiding principle all along when the studio chose to eliminate dialogue in their other shorts. The lack of dialogue in Married Life also brings the score into stark relief. This is another score from Michael Giacchino, composed especially for this montage. He brings instruments in and out to shift the tone, but the theme remains. Unlike the shorts, this theme will be used to invoke Ellie later on in the future, but for now it is used to invoke emotion and a particular nostalgic mood. A small but loving detail ends this particular section of the montage. The two sit reading, and without looking up, they hold each other's hand. This is one of the details, much like Luxo's wiggle, that physicalizes an emotion and is arguably superfluous to the plot. It may not propel the action forward, but is essential to the emotional understanding of the film, just like the montage as a whole. The next section of the film begins as if it is continuing like the bonding section. The couple is on another picnic, except instead of seeing animals in the clouds, they see babies. Sadly, this is an emotional high that will be quickly shut down, much like the Blue Umbrella's flight will be 4 years later. Carl and Ellie cheerfully paint a nursery as the music starts to slow down, eventually becoming just a piano. The camera tracks slowly right instead of making a cut and crosses a wall into a dark waiting room. The only light comes from an open doorway of a doctor's office with a diagram of a pregnant woman on the wall. Ellie sits in a chair framed by the door with her head in her hands. Carl stands behind her, hands on her shoulders and looking down. The only colors are grays and pale blues. Up until this point, the entire film has been awash in bright pastels, specifically magenta, which the filmmakers admit is Ellie's color. These colors have added to the bright and happy tone of the short and Ellie's joyful nature. By eliminating them, the art directors signal a dramatic change in the tone. Everything in this moment points to their happy dream being shattered. While John Lasseter jokes that the end of Red's dream is the studio's blue period, this scene has a better claim to being Pixar's saddest moment. While there is no question the content itself is tragic without any addition stylistically, the way the scene is presented pulls no punches emotionally. Due to the choice to track rather than cut, the doctor's office is literally presented side by side with the bright yellow nursery, and Giacchino slows the music so abruptly that the audience is given no preparation for the moment. While there is nothing magical about the montage before this moment, the intrusion of the tragic into Carl and Ellie's timeline makes their happiness seem at best too delicate to sustain, and at worst as naive a fantasy as inanimate objects coming to life. It is also an unexpected type of tragedy. While sad elements like the trope of a dead parent are common now in animated films, thanks to films like Bambi, this may be the first time a miscarriage is handled in an animated film. The filmmakers take a risk with a very adult concept very early in the film. This risk proves that Pixar really does not think of their audience as exclusively children. Denby confirms the sentiment early on in his review of Up that, quote, "these movies are fashioned as much for adults as for kids," end quote. Therefore, when they make a film about loss, they are going to delve as deeply as possible in order to make their viewer feel. There is a good chance that a child will not understand much about the scene other than it is sad, but for an adult it carries far more meaning. It becomes easier to critique films like Red's Dream and Boundin when you know that the studio responsible for it is also responsible for the scenes that follow when Ellie loses the baby. Just like Partly Cloudy can say so much just through actions and visuals, the rebounding scenes in the montage are delicately handled and communicate a very complex idea with silent and expressive filmmaking. Carl watches out the window with mournful eyes. While there is color back in the frame, shadows of trees dance around him. The next shot reveals from behind that he is watching Ellie, who is sitting on a chair in the backyard in the sun. Her hair is down for the first time in the montage. The music is still just a slow piano playing the same theme from before, just more sparsely. A medium close-up shows Ellie with her eyes closed, but her head tilted towards the sun, and her hair blowing just slightly in the wind. It is a beautiful meditative shot that is held for a few seconds as Carl walks over to her. He gently gets her attention, and they share a very slight, sad smile. In the next shot, he puts her old adventure book back into her lap. Both their faces light up, and then the film continues. These 3 shots have an incredible message behind them. First, they show a couple experiencing a pain beyond words. Before this moment, the montage has moved fast and at a cheerful clip, during which Ellie rarely stopped moving. Now she sits and mourns. Carl, meanwhile, has been meek and somewhat incompetent up until this point, but now he gets the chance to bring joy back into Ellie's life, just as she has brought joy into his. Sorry, those take on a new meaning after Inside Out. His answer is to return to her dreams from the past. Ellie's adventure book becomes more than a childhood relic, and instead becomes the couple's new chance at happiness. It is a defining moment in their relationship that they can move beyond their image of a conventional family and also learn to recover from losing what they considered most important in their life. A powerful idea on its own, this will also become Carl's most difficult battle as he must face it again when he loses Ellie. A new act in the montage is signaled by a shift in Giacchino's score. It is still the same theme, but he brings back in strings as Ellie paints a picture of Paradise Falls, the place she most wants to visit. The jar. This is a throwback to when Carl promised to take Ellie to Paradise Falls when they were children. He is now working to fulfill that promise again. The middle act of the montage is comprised of 2 montages, in a quick series of scenes where time is marked by shifts in light and the smashing of the coin jar. Different random life events, like Carl breaking his leg and a tree falling on the house, are shown, getting in the way of Carl and Ellie taking their trip. What is important for the film as a whole, however, is that these events are truly random and normal, and both Ellie and Carl treat each event with good humor. There are no villains in this piece, and Carl and Ellie still love their very average life. After the last smashing the jar, the most important emotional notes have been hit. Carl and Ellie love each other very much. They had to go through a true tragedy together. They responded to that tragedy with a new dream, and they have stayed positive in the face of every obstacle. It is therefore time for the filmmakers to prepare the viewer for the final chapter of Carl and Ellie's story. In a clever montage within the montage, Carl and Ellie's middle years are portrayed in different scenes of Ellie adjusting Carl's tie before they leave for work at the zoo, that ends with Ellie fixing a bow tie on an elderly Carl. The first scenes of Carl and Ellie's elderly life are as joyful as their young life. Ellie gleefully kisses Carl on the cheek. At work, Carl has mastered how to keep his balloon cart from flying away, and in the evening they dance. They are in complete control of their lives, and they seem to love it. It is only when the camera pauses slightly on the abandoned Paradise Falls jar that the viewer remembers their goal from before. During all this happy home time, they have never made it to South America. During a scene when the two are cleaning the house together, a change in the music, along with a paler color scheme, indicates a shift in the tone of the film again. The music slows down as Ellie slowly sweeps by the windows of the house. Carl is vacuuming the mantle and comes across an old picture of Ellie as a child in her explorer outfit. He looks up at her painting of Paradise Falls and frowns sadly. He looks back at Ellie, and we can see what he is sad about. She has become an old woman, and he never fulfilled his promise. Determined to make it better, Carl goes and buys tickets to Venezuela. The final tragedy of Carl and Ellie's love story is set up much like the first one. It begins with an emotional high when Carl buys the tickets, and it looks like they are going to go to South America. In a close-up, Carl tucks the tickets into a picnic basket as he reaches the top of their hill. There's a heartbreaking foreshadowing in the color and light of the scene, because the couple is having their picnic at sunset. The colors are warm again, but only because the sun is setting. Meanwhile, the music fades to mournful strings. As Carl looks back, Ellie, who always used to race ahead, is struggling to reach the top of the hill. Carl rushes to help her, and the Venezuela dream is immediately lost. The transition to the next shot mimics the pan right of the doctor scene. The camera moves right as it fades into Ellie's hospital room, where she lies reading her adventure book. The musical theme begins again, but once again it is just a piano. This scene is as slow and patient as the lawn scene. A balloon floats in, indicating Carl's presence. He holds her hand as she passes the adventure book back to him in the exact same way he passed it to her when the baby died. She then brushes his cheek, adjusts his tie, just as she always does, and he kisses her as the film fades to Carl sitting in a church bathed in magenta. He sits holding a balloon next to a wreath of flowers, and after a moment he stands up, turns, and the background fades to Carl and Ellie's house. The house is washed of all color, and the piano slows to its final notes as Carl slowly walks inside. Carl and Ellie's love story, without counting their introduction as children, like I said, is a brief 4 minutes and 17 seconds. It spans decades, and there is not a single word spoken. The emotions the sequences evokes in the audience range from pure joy to complete sadness. It is obstacles and acts, and the characters develop over the course of the story. After this montage, the viewer can fully understand Carl's attachment to his wife and why he feels the need to go on an adventure and fulfill her dream. It uses the same strategies as the short films to make the audience experience the character's story along with them, and therefore undergo the same emotional development. It experiments with realism, just like The Blue Umbrella will later on, but instead of doing so with a visual style, it does so with realistic narrative content. Married Life is a very human story with adult problems and complex solutions. It is not an idealized reality in that it removes real threats. It is an idealized reality because the character is able to find joy despite of those threats. The key to Pixar is that Pixar does not want such a reality to be ideal, they want it to be real. Ultimately, Married Life does what every Pixar short aspires to do. It creates an emotionally resonant story that equips the audience to leave the theater with a more optimistic look at life. Married Life gives the viewer an example of a couple who found real happiness together in the face of tragedy. The blue umbrella lets them see a happy city supporting their everyday commute. Partly Cloudy shows them that everyone deserves love and the underdog will pull through with the help of a friend. Presto gives them the safe space to laugh. Luxo Jr. shows them the joy of a father watching a child explore. These films all came from the same studio, comprised of many creative minds united under the same mission. The fact that the founders were able to create an environment for these men and women to work freely and express themselves is what is truly revolutionary about Pixar, not their fancy new tools. The Pixar brand is less a look or a single person and more a standard of excellence defined by years of refining the most effective storytelling techniques. Their artistry lies in the power of these techniques to make the world just a little bit more magical for their audiences, much like when John Lasseter first and it was fantastic to study them. I loved every minute of it, and but there are more things to talk about because they're not the only studio that's brilliant. They're not the only artists who create beautiful things. And I look forward to sticking around and talking to you more about different things. And thank you for sticking with me through this. And I hope you'll stick with me while I come back and talk about new things. Probably shorter bits, fewer sources, things like that. I can't write a thesis every week, but I definitely want to talk to you. So, all right, have a good week, everybody.